Welcome, everybody. Happy to see you all. I am not going to introduce our guest in a formal way because we have a formal introducer. My job is to introduce the introducer, but I can't stand here and not tell you how pleased and grateful I am to have Fred Hochberg here. I've known him for many years. I've seen him take on many different assignments in government and academia. And there are two things that are noteworthy about him. One is he's incredibly smart and capable, and the other is he's an extraordinarily decent and honorable person. And so he has a lot to impart here about an agency that has been in the news quite a bit lately. Engenders a lot of controversy and does a lot of important things. And so it's a great opportunity to clarify some of the issues surrounding it and to talk about the place of American business in the world. With that, let me introduce Connor McDonough, third-year student in economics and Near Eastern languages and civilizations from Glen Ellen, Illinois. And Connor is the junior chair of our student advisory board and spends an awful lot of time helping make the Institute of Politics what it is. So we appreciate him. Connor.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. This afternoon, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Mr. Fred Hochberg, President and Chairman of the Export-Import Bank, to the Institute of Politics. Over the past 7 years, Mr. Hochberg has served in this position leading the Export-Import Bank, which is the official export credit agency of the federal government, providing loan, guarantee, and insurance products to help export American goods abroad. And during his tenure leading the organization, Mr. Hochberg has helped support over 1.4 million jobs and directly supported small businesses as well. Prior to the Export-Import Bank, Fred Hochberg was the dean of the Milano School of International Affairs, Management, and Urban Policy at the New School in New York City. And he has also held positions in the Small Business Administration and on President-elect Obama's transition team. And during his time at the Small Business Administration, he also served on President Bill Clinton's Management Council. Earlier in his career, Mr. Hochberg was the longtime president and chief operating officer of the Lillian Vernon Company, which he transformed from a small family-owned business into a publicly traded international corporation. And in addition to his public service, Fred Hochberg has served as the chair of the Human Rights Campaign and sat on the board of the Democratic National Committee. He earned his bachelor's degree from NYU and his MBA from Columbia. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Fred Hochberg.
That was really, you didn't even read it. That was very good. That was very impressive.
He's going to travel with you from now on.
Totally. But I do want to, I've never had a chance to tell the story in front of David and an audience, so this is just too rich a chance to do this. So
Maybe I should leave.
No. So we're early in the President Obama's term. We're still having some controversy about Ex-Im Bank, and I stroll into David's office, and I'm talking to him, and he said, God, we always thought this was like a backwater agency. And I said, wait, is that why you put me there? Because so we've certainly moved Ex-Im more onto the front lines, front pages, and particularly so when President Obama announced we're going to double exports in 5 years. And I was actually at the State of the Union that day when he made that announcement. And somebody wrote me and they said, I guess your job got harder. I said, no, my job just got easier. When the President of the United States says we're going to do something, that made it actually simpler. So, but before we start, I know you all have sandwiches in your hand, but those of you who can, I want you to take out a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, and I want you to draw a dollar sign. You know where this is going, I think. All right, so draw a dollar sign. You know what a dollar sign looks like? You know, a big S with 2 sticks in it, not 1, 2 sticks, all right? Now, does someone here know where the dollar sign came from? Okay, I'll tell you. So, the story is that at the Straits of Gibraltar, there were 2 columns, and on it was etched a warning to sailors that said, nothing further beyond. Non plus ultra, nothing further beyond. Because they wanted to warn sailors, when you left the Mediterranean Sea, the earth was flat and you would fall off and die. So this was your warning sign. It was a stop sign, you know. Christopher Columbus goes out looking for India, comes back having discovered America, which is why we call Native Americans Indians. And King Charles said, oh, the world is not flat. So they actually, the first kind of desecration, they actually scratched off non plus ultra, and it now says plus ultra, which is the symbol of Spain, further beyond, look further beyond. And I only tell you that story is because that's really what I think President Obama was talking about as we double exports. That's what we're about at the Export-Import Bank, looking further beyond, looking beyond our shores, looking for business opportunities that are outside of the United States. We as a country still export a small amount of our GDP. About 14% of GDP is exports. Our peer group is Haiti and Rwanda. Those are the other 2 countries who have such a low level of exports as the United States. So partly we can talk a little bit later, but I think we got a ways to go that we could actually increase our exports, increase trade, do better for balance of trade, and put more people to work and put people to work in higher paying jobs. So what I want to do is I passed out a little pocket card, and this somewhat relates to the IOP. This was inspired by my first meeting with Senator Lindsey Graham, and we sat in his office on his sofa, and he said, he peppered me with a dozen questions, and then he said to me, Fred, you need a pocket card. And I said, I don't know, I'm not sure I know what that is, sir. You need a pocket card. And I said, what does that mean? Sorry for the guys, senators like these things because they fit in their suit pocket, and it tells them everything they need to know. It was obviously from an era before there were women in the Senate and in the House. So I thought I would go through this quickly, partly because it was designed for our sort of constituency audiences, but it also tells the story about what we do. So we're a jobs agency, and by that I mean we do not have any national interests as part of our mandate. There are 85 other export credit agencies around the world, but we are probably unique in that our focus is purely on supporting U.S. jobs. And that could be a job at for example, at a GE or a Siemens. If they're manufacturing in the United States, making things here, we can be called upon to support their exports. Many other countries, and particularly Asian countries, Japan, Korea, China, but even Germany and Britain, are much more about national interest. They want to support what's companies that are domiciled in their country, and will do things that may not even directly support jobs, but simply support that corporate entity. Japan is particularly skilled or adept at doing that. So, as Connor said, 109,000 jobs last year, 1.4 million jobs supported since President Obama took office. And those numbers, by the way, are calculated using the Bureau of Labor Statistics, not like our little black box. We actually used Bureau of Labor Statistics to come up with that number. $431 million. We discussed this briefly. Where's Max sitting? Right here. We collect money from our customers, our clients, overseas clients pay like points on a mortgage. They pay us a fee to borrow money or interest or premiums on credit insurance. We put aside, like any good business, a loan loss reserve account. Congress appropriates our money that we can spend. So before they take it, they appropriate our money. And what's left over, now think about this. We got a few business students here? No one from Booth? All right, all right. So Booth? Okay. Sales minus cost equals profit, right? We don't have the word profit in the budget. It doesn't exist in the federal government. We don't have the word profit. So this $431 million, which is profit, revenue minus cost, in the federal government we call this negative subsidy. Negative subsidy. Now, it took me, at least as a businessman, 6 months to be comfortable that that was like a good thing. You know, subsidy is a bad thing, negative subsidy is a good thing. It's like when you go to the doctor, and the doctor tells you, he or she looks at all your reports and said, Mr. Hochberg, everything's negative. You realize that's a good thing, right? So same thing, negative subsidy is good, subsidy is bad. So $431 million last year, $2 billion since President Obama was elected. That is $2 billion of cash, not fancy pants, hocus pocus, smoke and mirror accounting, cash. It's a very sad day for our chief financial officer. That money just ka-ching goes out of our account and goes over to the taxpayer through the Treasury Department. So we make money. 90%. 90% of our customers are small businesses. Small business is defined by the Small Business Administration, not our definition, theirs. So 90% of our customers are small companies. One of my favorites is right here in Chicago, the Howe Company, Mary Howe, 4th generation. They make ice making equipment. I spent a half a day with Mary. I learned more about ice making that morning. So they make ice making. If you ever go to Whole Foods or a supermarket where they have fresh fish, they make the ice that's that bed of ice that would be in the fish department because it keeps them much colder. They make ice making equipment that goes on fishing boats. So they make ice making equipment. Little company, $10 million a year. 40% of their sales are exports. They got maybe 35, 40 employees. We provide them with what's called credit insurance. So when Mary sells this equipment to a company in Japan or Korea, she can sell on what's called open account, the way she would sell in America. Ship the goods, get paid 30, 60 days later. The problem is in the United States, if she ships from Illinois to Tennessee, she'll know how to collect. Ships from Illinois to Tokyo or Bogota, what if they don't pay? By the time she gets on an airplane and hires a lawyer, she's eaten up all her sales and profit. So we will provide them with credit insurance if the private sector won't do that. $17 billion. That's how many exports we supported last year. That's the export value. Since President Obama was elected, $235 billion worth of exports supported by the Exim Bank, and about 1.5 times more than under President Bush. And we also report our default rates to Congress every 90 days to make sure that we keep a tight rein on our financials. We're running less than 0.25%. Since I don't have any Booth students here, I wanted to just define what 0.235%, that's less than 0.25%. So let me see if I had any other comments I want to make, and then we'll open up for questions. I would say the only other thing I would say, and then we'll open up for questions, is I'm a little more optimistic about the global economy than many people are. I actually just saw Austin Goolsbee about a half hour ago. There's a lot of gloom and a lot of concern about China. There's a lot of concern with falling commodity prices and what that's going to do for oil-rich nations. But as a result, the drop in oil prices is also helping a lot of consumers of petrochemicals. So countries like India, East Africa, many of those countries are actually benefiting because oil prices are low. But more importantly, as a result of this sudden shift, you're finding, and I'm seeing more economies around the world making the kind of economic reforms that they know was good to do but didn't have to do. When the economy's going well, you know, it's like if you're making a lot of money, get a good bonus, it's hard to say we should save more. You know, you save more. We should save more when things are good, but we wind up saving more when things are bad and not when they're. So I am seeing, and we're seeing around the world, bankruptcy laws changing, currency controls, state-owned enterprises, which are a lot in Asia in particular, are being made more market-oriented. Currency controls are dropping. It's easier to start small businesses. They're cutting red tape. And so I think that those reforms in China, in India, in Bangladesh, Indonesia, places I've been to recently, is going to actually have a very positive and more sustainable view of growth than we've seen up to now. But it's going to take some time. It's going to be lumpy. And I would say it takes extraordinary political leadership to do so. I'm a member of the Obama administration. You know, President Obama did extraordinary political leadership, getting us through the worst financial crisis since the Depression. Some countries are really going to do this well because they've got good leadership, and some are going to have a harder time doing this because, just look at the newspaper in Brazil, that's a country that's really going to have a harder time resetting itself, and partly it's a political and the governance issue as well. So with that, why don't I'll open it up. I don't know, do people just get up and ask?
Yes.
Okay, I just know you have to speak to the microphone because they're recording this. So with that, the floor is yours.
a lot of the political campaigns are waging attacks against free trade and against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But one of the goals of the TPP is to rein in state-owned enterprises, which should open a lot of markets to American exports. So my question is, how can the message be made to show that these agreements actually will increase American jobs, not take them away? Like that doesn't seem to be a message that the public mind has received.
You know, thank you for that. I mean, that's one of the things I've been trying to do in the final year of the Obama administration is really talk to audience and say, you know what, we have got this national conversation, I believe, just wrong. You know, 1.4 million jobs were supported by the exports we finance, not just the exports in total, just the ones we finance. And I think that President Obama said just the other day, you know, there were a number of former trade deals that turned out to be not so good. And people are still thinking a trade deal done 20 years ago is the problem. Now, TPP remedies a lot of that. And let's also, people don't want to remember, our largest two trading partners today is Canada and Mexico. It was not that way before. So we have got to, and frankly, I would say the business community in particular needs to do a far better job. I'll give you two examples of companies I think that do a good job of that. One headquartered in this very city is Boeing. If you walk into a Boeing factory, the tail fins of every plane is the first thing painted. So when you come into work every day, when you clock in, what do you see? You see Lufthansa, Air Berlin, Ethiopian Airways, Kenya Airways. Every worker there knows I've got a good job and a good paying job because what I'm making is going overseas. There's a little company I visited in Jackson, Mississippi, AZZ. They make electrical conduit. And in their lunchroom is the flags of every one of their customers. They are communicating to their employees, that's why you have a job, that's why you're getting a good paycheck every week. We aren't doing that around company after company. We've got to find a way to change this narrative. It's a dangerous narrative, and it's also not true.
Fred, can I just, am I supposed to use that?
You're going to tell me it was not a backdoor.
You mentioned plainly it wasn't. I can see it on the card. One of the critiques that the opponents of Ex-Im have cited was Boeing itself, that you would stress that 90% of your customers are small businesses, but far less than 90% of your money goes to these small businesses, and you have major corporations like Boeing who take advantage of the bank. The critique is, why subsidize major corporations? And so I just wanted you to address that.
A couple of things. If you turn the card over, 41% of the exports we supported were shipped directly from small businesses. So first of all, it's maybe 90% of the transactions, still 41% of the exports. Now, I cited this upstairs. You know, when I was in business school, the classic example was beer. You know, 20% of the beer drinkers drink 80% of the beer. The old 80-20 rules. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why that's a truism. So it is not surprising that you have clients that use you more intensely than others. And obviously, you finance a Boeing aircraft, you have to do a lot of small businesses to equal it. Number two, this is true with Boeing, this is true with large corporations in America. They aren't manufacturers. Think about the auto industry. Ford assembly plants, GM assembly plants. They don't make cars, they assemble them. When we had the auto crisis, we were worried about their supply chain. Large companies, whether it's Boeing or Ford or GM or GE, they are what are called systems integrators. They are pulling together components and assembling them. Boeing, for example, has got 15,000 companies in the supply chain. About 6,000 of them are small businesses. We aren't allowed to count the indirect small businesses. But in every Boeing plane, there's 6,000 small businesses that are selling things. I don't know the exact ones, but it's from the coffee pots to the fabric on the seats to the seat belts. So a lot of that is supporting small business. That gets a little lost in the debate. And I would say the last thing is, not one penny of the money we provide in financing goes to a large company. It goes to their customers. So I was in Ethiopia. Ethiopian Airlines can buy a Boeing plane or an Airbus plane. If we want to have a level playing field, if we want to make sure that they compete equally, we've got to provide the same financing package. So there's something called the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that sets a framework and says if a government's going to supply financing, it's got to be on the same terms and conditions, same number of years, say 12 years, same fees, so that we provide financing that's got to be self-sustaining. That's why we made $431 million. And no one can sort of tilt the deck by saying, well, I'm going to offer cut rate financing versus you. Now, one of the problems we have is that a lot of countries like China, Russia, that are not a part of that agreement. And one thing the president's trying to do is get everybody in that tent. But I would say, one, large company exports are made up of a lot of small businesses. And we're in the most competitive environment, even in my 7 years at the bank. It's more competitive today than it was 7 years ago. And there are 85 export credit agencies around the world. If you're at all interested, we put out a competitiveness report every June. By the way, when I got to the bank, this was like a green binder with like 250 pages. We put on a slim, fast diet. We got it down to 90. We're trying to get it to 40. But essentially explains what is the competitive landscape when it comes to federal governments around the world supporting their exports. And right now they're 85 and counting. And we are actually, as a percent of GDP, the smallest, which is as it should be. We got the best capital markets, best banking system. We should have the smallest. I just don't think we should have zero.
Thank you for speaking with us today. Some of the criticism surrounding the Ex-Im Bank has come from environmental concerns. And since 1992, I believe Congress has required the Ex-Im Bank to do environmental impact statements about all the projects it finances. But one source of controversy came with the Sasson coal plant in India, which I'm sure you're very much aware of. But there were concerns that environmental monitoring wasn't taking place at the acceptable level, and there were other concerns about some health and safety incident violations. And so in the recent 2015 report by the Office of the Inspector General of the Ex-Im Bank, what they recommended was that the bank develop a strategy to take stronger actions against a project with serious or repetitive violations with respect to the bank's environmental and social policies. And they further recommended that that include establishing more formal policies and procedures for enhanced risk-based monitoring and reporting. And so in the bank's response, it said that it would begin to evaluate that need for establishing formal policies in order to manage serious or repetitive environmental violations. So I was wondering to hear more since September 2015, if that evaluation has taken place in particular, and if you could just speak more generally about the difficulty of balancing the desire to enhance American manufacturing with doing environmental due diligence.
Well, as you accurately portrayed, since 1992, Congress has established an environmental standard that we have to follow at the Ex-Im Bank. And in fact, under President Bush, the bank was sued and lost a lawsuit before I ever got there because they said the bank wasn't taking that into account sufficiently. So we have continually enhanced and improved our environmental standards from a result of that lawsuit and continue to do so, and frankly have done some more under President Obama. One thing I would say is we are the most transparent export credit agency in the world. One of the largest fights we have is I cannot get Germany, Japan, Britain, France to put on their website the same degree of disclosure that we do about our environmental standards, because I think you said it right. Listen, we don't want to say we're going to be purist here, and then all we're going to do is buy coal plant equipment from Germany, and that's not going to make the world cleaner. It's not going to help the environment. That was a good study we did. That was a very difficult credit to make a determination. We established a pretty high level of environmental considerations that had to be met. That plant is actually not operational yet, so it's still in the construction and testing period. But at that time, we established the highest standard of any coal-fired power plant could be. Since that time, we have actually, because since '92, we have continually sort of, as technology changes, thinking about the environmental change, we've changed and updated our requirements. Today, we only would do a coal-fired power plant only in roughly the 80 poorest countries of the world defined by the World Bank. And India would no longer qualify, in fact. So that is a result of working with the president, working with the White House, and finding a balance. There are many people in this country who feel, burn baby burn, drill baby drill. We should more coal, more fossil fuel. We're trying to find that balance between protecting the environment and also balancing it against other considerations going the other way. And the fact is we're dealing in a globalized world. We can't simply make our own policy and say the rest of the world just has to follow, because they haven't, has been the problem. So I'm proud of the record we have. And I'm proud of the fact we keep trying to make it better. It isn't perfect, but as you mentioned, today we couldn't do that coal-fired power plant. Certainly not. We could do it in a very poor country, but we couldn't do it there. And the problem is, very poor countries are going to build coal plants whether we like it or not. Whether we like it or not. And I'd rather they buy them from America or even Japan that's got much higher standards, much better emission controls, much higher environmental quality than just buy a dirty power plant. The man in yellow.
I was late because I went to the business school where I thought this meeting was going to be. I don't know if you're aware, by the way, next door is the Henry Paulson Institute. Maybe you should talk in a whisper here. Those fellows believe that a rising tide raises all yachts. But my question is about the $15 minimum wage. What do you think about that? How will it affect I don't know if you've talked about it, I came in a little late. How will it affect our exports?
Well, that's totally outside of my the work I do. I'll say the following: export jobs, and what we export tend to be much higher wage jobs. They pay on average as much as 18% more than other jobs in our economy. So they tend to be, because what do we export? We are not exporting T-shirts and sneakers and commodities. I mean, commodities, yes, farm equipment, farm goods. But what we do export are power plants, satellite technology, locomotives, airplanes, nuclear power plants. I mean, things that are very complex, that are very high-paying jobs. So the exports themselves pay very well. I'm going to let somebody else talk about the $15 minimum wage. I have an opinion, but I'll let somebody else talk about it. Yes.
You mentioned that the bank makes a profit. But what would you then say to Tea Party Republicans who have been trying to abolish it if they say that, well, if it's a profitable enterprise, private businesses can do this function? So what is the reason why, if there is a reason why, it should be a public function, or why government has to back it? And lurking behind that, a question of whether there are some long-run risks, like there are a lot of credit insurances of municipal bonds, for example, where there are, in fact, huge default possibilities, but it's not really apparent for a long time.
Right. We exist, the people who come to us for a loan guarantee, a lot of what we do is provide a guarantee. So actually, GE Locomotives, GE is headquartered here in Chicago. So we finance a number of their high-tech locomotives that are more fuel efficient, lower emissions, to South Africa. The reason we're brought in is because a bank, whether it be Citibank, JP Morgan, HSBC, Foreign Bank, or US Bank, essentially said this is too risky a market for us to do on our own. And particularly, even if it's a sovereign guarantee, guaranteed by the government, they are much more comfortable with a US government enforcing that guarantee than just a private enterprise. So one, it's the private sector that calls us in saying, we're not going to make this loan unless we can buy insurance. So what we're really doing is selling insurance. They pay us a fee, my negative subsidy, they pay us a fee, insurance premium essentially, and if the loan goes south, we pay back the loan and then we collect. Now, you say, well, if it's so risky, why are we doing that? In all seriousness, you know why we can collect better than anybody else? We have an Army, we have a Navy, we have the Air Force, we have the Marines. Gunboat diplomacy was about collecting debt. So U.S. government does a far better job collecting on someone, whether it's a small business, and small business tell me this, whether it's a small business or a large business, we do a far better job because people don't default on the U.S. government. So we can take that risk that the private sector would find too intolerable. I'll give you a perfect example is we're talking about a bunch of nuclear power plants. That is something it's really hard to get a commercial bank to make a loan to build a nuclear power plant. But if we want Westinghouse or GE technology to be used around the world to build a power plant, we're going to have to find a way to finance it, or they're not going to buy it, or they'll buy Chinese or Russian. On the default question, we report our defaults because members of Congress are concerned every 90 days. So it'd be very hard for it to be a runaway that you would not see coming, since every 90 days, every 3 months, we send a report to Congress what the default rates are. We're running 0.25%. Our reserves are about 5%. So we have about reserves in excess of 20 times at the moment our current write-offs. But that's why we report it on a regular basis. I think in the back row I see.
You had mentioned that the world has become increasingly more competitive in the business global landscape. Could you just speak more broadly to how you see your role with helping American technology, especially that China's pouring lots of man hours into research and they're now competing on the IP front?
Sure. I mean, a great example of that would be in India. In 2011, we were the largest financier of solar power in India. We finance more solar power than any other export credit agency globally. So when I say it's more competitive, I've been in this job 7 years. Today, if you're selling a solar energy or anything like that, you need to come to the table with your bid, generally with what's called a letter of interest from us that would say you're ready to finance it. You're all going to a very expensive school, right? So, don't admission letters come out like April 15th? Is that when, that's the old day when they used to come out, or April 1st? Okay? No one goes to college and after they get the letter of acceptance then says, oh, how are we going to pay for this degree for the next 4 years, okay? No one's going to buy something from the United States or any country and make the purchase decision without thinking about how they're going to pay for it. So when I say it's more competitive, there are now 85 export credit agencies. They all have a different goal than we do. Our goal is to fill in a financing gap when the markets aren't there. Their goal is to promote exports and jobs in their country. So when I say it's more, we have seen greater competition from other governments supporting their exports than I ever saw 6-7 years ago. And as I said, almost every bid now has got to have some indication that we would consider backing it. That's not a guarantee, it's simply that we've been consulted and we'd consider backing it. This side of the room is much quieter.
So 10 years down the line, do we see like US exporting manufacturing equipment components similar to say Germany or someone? If not, like what are the 3 or 4 key things that we should be doing?
To maintain manufacturing edge here?
Yes, and become maybe an export powerhouse, which we are not right now.
Well, let's remember 2 things. We're the second largest exporter in the world. Number 2, we were number 1 in 2002. 2002, we were the largest, and Germany overtook us in 2002. 2010, China overtook Germany, and then we moved ahead of Germany again. So 1, we are an export powerhouse, but I really sincerely believe we could be the number 1 exporter in the world. It's not just about bragging rights, though it would be nice to be number 1. But I told you it's 14% of our economy. My analogy is like diet and exercise. You know, if I eat less and walk a little bit more, exercise more, it's amazing. You get in much better shape than if you try and just do one or the other. So if we could push exports a little bit more, keep our balance of payments a little bit better, a lot of things fall into line. So what do we need to do, I think? Well, a number of things. 1, it's invest in education. We still have to have a great we have a great education system, certainly the best higher education system in the world. Not as good at the primary and high school level. So one is education. Two is our tax system. We got to get our tax system in line with the rest of the world. Three is infrastructure. We've got to get our infrastructure. The highway bill, which we were a part of, before they passed a 6-year highway bill, we were extending our highway bill 90 days at a time. How are we going to build a 21st century infrastructure 90 days at a time, 60 days at a time? So infrastructure. And I would say probably the last piece is the government sector needs to be more market oriented. I believe we're pretty restrained because we require you to fill out in your application why you need a loan or guarantee from us. Why can't you get it from the private sector? But whether it's government pensions, a number of those things, we haven't revolutionized the operation of government in the same way that the private sector has been able to sort of take advantage of technology, whether it's digital technology or so forth. So those are 3 or 4 I would suggest. In the back corner.
Hi. If we continue down the path of normalizing relations with Cuba and then we open back up to trade, how do you envision that will look? Because I know that they have a lot of very basic needs. They buy a lot of their very basic products from China, and it's very expensive for them to ship it all the way from there to Cuba.
Well, first of all, we are closed in Cuba. Congress would have to change the embargo law for us to really do business with Cuba as a country. And actually, just the way the environment's written into our charter, Cuba, not doing business with Cuba is written, so we'd have to change our charter. That's 2 things. Third thing, actually, that has to happen, unlike places like Burma or Iran, for example, countries are a member of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which monitors how economies are doing. Cuba exited that in 1964. So it would take some time, because we use that data, not just the US, but countries around the world, use that to essentially assign a credit rating to a country. So Cuba's been out of that system now for 50 plus years. So that has to change. But to the more fundamental question, Cuba is a country with 11 million people. President Obama made a giant step forward in terms of opening up a mission there. Secretary Kerry was there. Actually, our general counsel was a Cuban-American woman. She was part of that delegation. That will take some time. I know that Starwood Hotels is opening there, and some telecom business and flights are beginning to resume. So, that'll take time. But we're not going to be doing anything there until the embargoes are lifted and there's a banking system to work with, and our charter would. So there are a number of steps hoops we'd have to jump through before we could do that. Yes.
I'll ask a 2-part question. One.
Well, who are you? You look old for a student.
I am. I'm posing as a student. I'm the executive director here, and just came in, was listening on the steps, and wanted to just follow up on your comment about the elements that would need to be in place to increase competitiveness. So one of those was a tax policy that was more competitive and aligned with what other international entities have, countries have. What are some of the things there that would make, in your opinion, American businesses more competitive from a tax standpoint? Is one question.
Well, I mean, we have a tax. I was a businessman for 20 years, so I dealt with it. I'm not a tax expert, but our tax rates, and the president acknowledged, amongst the highest in the world. So it does provide an incentive for companies to keep money offshore. If they could bring that money onshore, we might find smart ways of deploying it to build infrastructure, to increase expanding of plants and equipment. There are a lot of things that could happen with that. So the problem with politics in general is, if I can't have it my way, then just leave it the status quo. So the problem with fixing the tax code right now, the Republicans have one view. The Democrats have a different view, and each one says, well, if I can't have it my way, then just leave it. And that's unfortunately, many things in life are that way. You know, if you can't agree with your spouse where to go to dinner, well, fine, we'll just stay home. We won't go out. So, you know, we have to, you know, I think there's hope in a new administration that there'd be a fresh start, a restart in 2017. Also, the world is far more, you know, it's a trite term, but the world is a lot more globalized, and therefore the requirement to do something is far greater now than it was in the past. So I think that we've got to find a reset that, you know, if you talk to the folks at the Booth School, you know, when I went to business school, the classic way of dealing with taxes, you actually have corporations pay zero tax, and you have it all at the individual level, so the shareholders pay the tax. That's a non-starter in our country. The idea, who's going to run for office? I know what we're doing to cut corporate taxes to zero. That would be a non-starter. But if you ask an economist, that's the most efficient way of doing it. So we're going to have to find something in between, and you know, generally something in between will work. But it's certainly something we're going to have to address. I mean, I ran a direct marketing firm, a catalog firm. You know, we didn't have anything offshore. We paid 35%. Amazon pays, you know, at least on the United States, pays 35%. So those are much higher rates than companies that maybe have a lot of that more globalized that could pay. The problem is we can't have companies leave the United States and move to zero tax havens, and therefore start paying zero taxes. So it is a complicated issue to find how we find something that's both fair and equitable, but also encourages economic growth.
Just a quick comment on the tax rates. The U.S. rate is 35%, but is not, in fact, the effective rate more like 12% and hence quite a bit closer to other countries?
I don't think it's quite 12. I thought it was in the 20s, which is why they've talked about bringing it into where the OECD, the Organization of Economic, essentially the 34 wealthiest countries in the world, are in the mid-20s. So the thought was, what if we bring it to the mid-20s and eliminate a lot of deductions? You know, the problem with changing the tax code is, my theory is, losers. Let's assume if you say, you know, we're going to get rid of the home mortgage deduction. So anybody who owns it say, oh my God, that's money, but we're going to lower your tax rate in a total. So first of all, people who lose something are very conscious of what they're losing, and what they may gain a year or two later is theoretical. It might happen, maybe it won't happen. I'll see it when I believe it. So the problem with changing tax codes are losers, people who will actually start paying more taxes, will fight like hell because they see real cash, and the winners are somewhat disbelieving, rightly so, because they, well, when I get my tax bill in 3 years, I'll see if it really did drop. So sounds nice, but maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. So I think that's the hard part. And the other thing is, there are a lot of lobbyists all over Washington who are paid a lot of money to keep tax rates low. So there's a lot of incentive to just keep them the way they are. Protect those special tax considerations that are, you know, when President Reagan did it started called the Tax Simplification Act of 1986. And I don't remember, but it came out about 2,000 pages at the end. So it was nothing near the tax. They dropped that name, but that was the original. It just became the Tax Act of 1986 because there was nothing simple about it.
Let's take 2 more questions here.
Oh, 2 more. We have time for 2. We can do 2. I've exhausted the room. Uh-oh.
Less aggressive than before. On a slightly more kind of personal background note, you've worked a lot in private business, very successful there. You moved into a large government agency that doesn't operate like one. So you have one of the best perspectives on what exactly about something being a public entity changes the culture, changes the management. I was wondering if you could talk about your experience, and you know there'll be new administration coming in a few months. The people who are going to take over that job, take over other jobs, what advice would you give them, people making a similar transition?
Okay, that's a great question. Because I was actually a dean at the New School of Public Affairs. I would say 2 thoughts I've had on that. People in the public sector need to operate more like people in the private sector. In other words, performance, results, metrics, deliverables, the way people running a private sector or a corporation will be. And people in the private sector need to be far more conscious of stakeholders, their place in the community, how are they operating, are they doing something right, not just for their shareholders, but for all their stakeholders and their supply chain and so forth. So one, I really do believe that the requirements in the public sector and the private sector are getting closer and closer, that they're, you know, I have to deliver specific results, meet a budget, deliver loans and guarantees, insurance on time in a timely fashion. We monitor that on a weekly basis. So we're much more like, we're more and more like the private sector, and I think more and more government is moving that way, whether it's collecting garbage or plowing the streets or delivering the mail. So I think that those skills are more and more analogous in both sides. In my job, I would say, so the difference though, there is still a vast difference. I mean, the level of transparency and accountability that you have in the public sector is far greater than you'll ever have in the private sector. You know, we are, quote unquote, in a fishbowl. And we make a loan for a power plant, you know, we're very transparent about that. So people coming from the private sector, a lot of them find that just too intrusive or just very burdensome. Or whether it's contracting or hiring people is much different. So I think that someone has to sort of be attuned to that. I mean, I feel fortunate. My first job was the number 2 at the Small Business Administration. It's really hard to come into these jobs cold if you've never been in the public sector and go to the top. I mean, Penny Pritzker's done a brilliant job at Commerce, but that's the exception, you know, because she had not run, but to, you know, because we're much more rule bound, and partly because we're more transparent, and we have to do things in a very somewhat rigid way, and that can drive some people in the private sector batty. But she's a great example of someone who came into the top of the Commerce Department and done a really great job.
Let me ask one last follow-up just to wrap. For those students here who may be interested in career in international business, based on your experience currently, but also your past experience at SBA and in the private sector, beyond capital needs, what in your experience are the most important things that entrepreneurs and smaller business owners need to be mindful of if they want to be successful in overseas markets?
Okay, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to make another pitch also. You know, one, actually, it's an easy thing that most companies overlook. Our Commerce Department has something called U.S. Export Assistance Centers, and we love it. It's called a USIAC. I mean, a terrible term, but it's U.S. Export. There are over 100 of them in the United States. We have more Export Assistance Centers in the United States than we have overseas. So step one is, particularly small businesses ought to go to their local U.S. Export Assistance Center, which gives them, you can come in with a product and they will help you figure out where to sell it, how to sell it, set up the trade mission and all that kind of stuff. So that's clearly one. Many small businesses that sell overseas, it's a funny coincidence. If you ask the CEO, where do you go on vacation and where do you export to? It is often the same place. I like going to Italy, so I started selling things in Italy. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, that's really good, because something like 55% of small businesses sell to export to one market. So if you could do one, how about 2? If they could all start doing to 2, we could do a lot better. So that's one. 2, I think, a lot of it depends on 2 examples that I think are kind of remarkable is we export, a woman in North Carolina sells pickles. She got laid off as a stockbroker. Her name is Jenny Fulton. It's called Jenny's Pickles, and we finance them going to China, Mongolia, Canada, and now the Mideast. And we also finance ice cream, Bassett's Ice Cream, the oldest ice cream company in America. We finance their exports to China. So if you can sell pickles, and you can sell ice cream to China and to the Mideast, you can probably sell a lot of stuff. And my last pitch would be, because we talked upstairs, if students want to get involved, you know, finding an internship in Washington is a great way of really getting a great bird's eye view. We have interns on a regular basis, so I told, I think, You. There you are. Yes, that we're looking for interns on a regular basis, not just in the summer, but year round. So that would be my parting comment.
That's fantastic. I think a lot of students may know this already, but if you don't, we have a robust internship program with lots of opportunities on our website at politics.uchicago.edu. Those opportunities are posted on Handshake for undergraduates, but also every Thursday on our newsletter. And if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do so on our website, politics.uchicago.edu. Please join me in thanking Chairman Fred Hochberg.
Thank you.
US Import Export.
And people said that Chicago is where fun goes to die. This didn't seem that bad.
That's old CW.
Oh, that's the old. That's the old.
UCW, Chicago's the place to have a good time.
Oh, okay, good. All right, great. Well, thank you. David. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much.